Before your phone could play games that look better than a PS2 title, before gaming meant microtransactions, there was a simpler time, a glorious time in gaming history, the 6th generation of gaming. I know I sound like an old guy right now, but this is true. Video games used to be so much simpler and easier to enjoy. I feel like the 6th generation was the peak of what video games were supposed to be. I'm not saying that I don't enjoy the newer generation of gaming. I still enjoy playing video games and it will always be my favorite hobby. And I understand that things have to evolve. But there's just something about the 6th generation of gaming that always takes me back to it. And for a multitude of reasons that I want to discuss in this video. The main reason being the games that these consoles have to offer. The 6th generation of gaming is the most important generation of gaming in my opinion. This generation introduced us to 4 of the best and important gaming consoles of all time. The Dreamcast, the PlayStation 2, the GameCube, and the Xbox. This was at a time when gaming was becoming mainstream, but was still niche in a way. In this video, I will tell you why I think this generation will never be topped and why I think it's the best generation of gaming of all time. I want to talk about every single console in this video, so it's gonna be a long one. So go grab yourself a drink, some food, a blunt, anything you need, sit back and enjoy the video. Before we start, I would really appreciate it if you guys like the video and subscribe to the channel. It would mean a lot to me. And so yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. In the early to mid-90s, Sega was riding high on the success of the Sega Genesis and was at the top of the gaming industry with Nintendo. However, their next console, the Sega CD, 32X, and Sega Saturn suffered from poor marketing, sales, rushed launches, and limited third-party support. The Sega Saturn in particular launched prematurely in North America in 1995. Although the Sega Saturn found some success in Japan, its complex architecture made it difficult to develop for. It could not compete with Nintendo and Sony in the West, with Sega only having 12% of the market compared to Sony's 47% and Nintendo's 40%. By the late 90s, Sega's reputation was damaged. Sega then decided to create a powerful but cheaper next generation to bring Sega back to the top of the gaming industry. Sega then decided to come back to the gaming industry with the Sega Dreamcast. They decided to use GD-ROM discs instead of the new DVD-ROM format at the time to save money and combat piracy, which backfired on them. It also uses a custom version of Windows called Windows CE, which is why you can find compatible with Windows CE in front of every Dreamcast console, and which is why porting PC games on the Dreamcast was easier. This is also one of the first consoles with internet functionalities with a 56K modular modem, which was unheard of at the time. Out of all the 6th generation consoles, it was the first one to drop. It launched on November 27, 1998 in Japan, and it sold out by the end of the day. The Dreamcast only came out with 4 launch titles, which slowed down the sales. The launch was way better in the US. It released on September 9, 1999, and sold 1 million units in 2 months, with 18 launch titles. The Dreamcast ended up being crushed by the PS2 when it came out. After the success of the original PlayStation in the mid-90s, Sony had become a dominant force in the gaming world. The original PlayStation sold over 100 million units worldwide and had reshaped the home console market. The PS2 development started in 1994 after the launch of the original PlayStation to stay ahead of the curve. They wanted a new console that would play the old generation and the new generation of games. Sony also decided to introduce new technology in the system, which would be DVD-ROM drives, which would allow users to watch DVDs. It would also have games in DVD formats, which would increase the amount of space for games on the disc, which would be good for graphics. Sony, just like Sega, decided to implement internet capabilities on the console with a 56K modular modem and have a hard drive with games that would support it. The games were easy to make, and the console was cheaper than an actual DVD player, which was a big deal at the time. Some people would get the PS2 just to watch DVDs and have a gaming console at the same time. The PS2 was so successful that it had a lifespan of 13 years, which lasted from 2000 to 2013. The last game released on the PS2 was PES 2014. The PS2 sold over 155 million units around the world, which makes the PlayStation 2 the most sold video game console of all time. For Sega and the Dreamcast, the PS2 was the final blow. But for the gaming world, it opened the door to bigger worlds, deeper stories, and bolder ideas. Even today, its impact is seen in how we play, and what we expect from a gaming experience. The PS2 dropped on March 4th, 2001 in Japan, October 26th in North America, and November 24th in Europe. The launch was very successful, with 1.4 million units sold by the end of March in Japan. The GameCube development started in 1997 after the release of the Nintendo 64. It was officially announced on August 25, 2000. It was released on September 14, 2001 in Japan and November 18 in North America. Compared to the PlayStation 2, the GameCube only sold 22 million units during its lifetime. It is currently Nintendo's third worst selling console. Nintendo made a bold decision with the GameCube's design. It was small, cube-shaped, and came with a carrying handle, a quirky but intentional choice to emphasize its portability and family-friendly image. That reason alone is one of the main reasons for the poor sales. The other main reason was because the GameCube didn't use DVDs, which was a big deal at the time, while the PS2 and Xbox did. The GameCube used smaller discs, which were mini DVDs, which meant that there was less space on them for games. A GameCube disc could only store 1.5 gigabytes, while the PS2 single layer disc could hold up to 4.7 gigabytes, and a double layer disc could hold up to 8.5 gigabytes. This meant that developers had to alter GameCube version of games so that it could fit on a disc. The GameCube also supported online play, but it was severely underused. Only a handful of games supported online play, like the Phantasy Star Online series. However, Nintendo began experimenting connectivity between handheld and console, allowing players to link the Game Boy Advance for use of a second screen, or a controller in games like Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles or The Legend of Zelda: Four Swords Adventures. The GameCube also has one of the most iconic controllers of all time, and people still use it to this day. You can buy one right now, officially made by Nintendo. It was also $100 cheaper than the PS2 and the Xbox at launch. Even though the GameCube wasn't appreciated when it first came out, it is one of the most beloved consoles and one of the most popular to collect for. When Microsoft entered the console market in the early 2000s, it was an untested giant in a territory dominated by Japanese companies. The arrival of the Xbox in 2001 would reshape the gaming industry and reshape Sega's legacy. A lot of people forget this, but Microsoft and Sega had a very close relationship. After the Dreamcast failed, many of its top titles and developers moved to Xbox. Games like Jet Set Radio Future and Shenmue found a home on the Xbox. In 2002, Microsoft bought Rare, which was a big deal at the time. They made classic games like Donkey Kong Country, GoldenEye 007, Banjo-Kazooie, and the list goes on. And that is why there's a remake of Conker's Bad Fur Day on the Xbox. The Xbox began as an internal skunkworks project at Microsoft in the late 90s. A group of engineers wanted to leverage the company's DirectX graphics API, hence the name DirectX Xbox. They wanted to create a Windows-based console that could challenge Sony's growing dominance with the PlayStation 2. But Bill Gates wasn't initially sold by the idea. But by 1999, Microsoft saw the PlayStation 2 as a serious threat, not just to gaming, but as a potential all-in-one entertainment hub that could rival the PC. And that got Microsoft on board. They also decided to put a lot of emphasis on Xbox Live. The Xbox was the most powerful console of the 6th generation, and it was the only console that came with a hard drive. That meant you didn't need memory cards for saving games, which was crazy at the time. This was the first real online gaming network on consoles that actually worked. Xbox Live launched in 2002 and allowed players to play games online with friends, use voice chat, and maintain a universal gamertag across games, features that are now standards in video games. The original Xbox was a success, and it sold more than a GameCube. The Xbox entered the 6th generation as the newcomer, but its power, online focus, and bold vision ensured Microsoft would become a lasting force in the gaming industry. The main and obvious reason I think the 6th generation of gaming was the best is because of the games, plain and simple. And I'm not just talking about one console or a few standout titles, it's across the board. PlayStation 2, Xbox, GameCube, and even the Dreamcast. The games were amazing. What really stood out back then was that developers seemed to have one clear goal in mind: make games fun and not monetized to death. Just fun. You could walk into a game store and pick up a random game that you've never heard of before and be blown away. There was this sense of discovery and joy that is hard to replicate today. And it wasn't just the big games. Sure, there were plenty of AAA bangers, but even AA titles were surprisingly good. You could buy them affordably and they felt like complete polished experiences. Not every game was a masterpiece, of course, but even the bad ones often had heart. You could tell that developers poured effort and creativity into their work. There was pride in making something memorable. This is not meant to be a games back then versus now rant, but let's be honest. How many times have you opened Steam or turned on your console just to stare at your library, not knowing what to play? It's ironic. We have more games available than ever, and yet, it often feels like there's less. Back in the 6th generation, each platform had amazing first-party exclusives. Just to name a few, on the PS2, we had God of War and Shadow of the Colossus. On Xbox, we had Halo and Fable. On the GameCube, we had games like Metroid Prime and Wind Waker. And for the Dreamcast, we had Jet Set Radio and Skies of Arcadia. And these are just a few first-party titles that came out during that time. There were so many more first-party titles that came out that were amazing. Even if you look beyond the blockbusters, there were incredible AA games like Beautiful Joe, Def Jam Fight for New York, Sphinx, and Onimusha. And like mentioned before, the focus wasn't squeezing every penny out of us. Sure, it was a business, and devs wanted to make money, but it didn't feel like we were constantly being milked. The games came complete. No day one patches, no DLC planned before launch. You paid for the game, and that was it. It was just you and the full experience from the moment you put the disc in. There were no microtransactions. If you wanted better gear, costumes, or unlockables, you had to earn them. These days, even single-player games have microtransactions, which make no sense at all. For example, this is how I remember Super Smash Bros. You didn't start with every character, but you had to grind, work, and get better at the game if you wanted to unlock all of them. Now, you can still unlock the majority of the characters by playing the game, but certain characters are locked behind a paywall, which sucks. That means spending more money on the game that you already paid for. And not only were there no DLCs, but games just had more content and more stuff that felt worth grinding for. Unlocking characters, maps, skins, and even cheat codes. It was all in the game. You just had to play. Back then, gosh, I sound like an old guy right now. But back then, we actually got the value of what we paid for. Games came complete. And here's another thing. There's a lot of games that came out during that time that are being remastered for the newer consoles, which proves how much these games were powerful. People still want to play those games on the recent consoles, and there is a new generation of gamers that never played those games before. Here's a few games that have been remastered in the last few years: Shadow of Colossus, Resident Evil 4, GTA Trilogy, or the recently released Metal Gear Solid Delta. The games of the 6th generation are very lucrative for gaming companies, and that shows how much those games were good and important. Also, let's not forget about the Nintendo Switch 2 subscription, which allows you to play GameCube games. And here's another thing. I feel like developers lost creative freedom. During that time, developers were constantly experimenting. For example, you had games like Katamari Damacy. In that game, you control a tiny prince who rolls a magical adhesive ball around various environments, collect an object that sticks to it to make it grow larger. I feel like today, only indie devs would take that kind of risk. A lot of games had flavor and personality. It wasn't all about a cheap open world game or having a battle royale mode. Games in the 6th generation had a strong sense of identity. Art styles were bold and varied. Some aimed for realism, like Metal Gear Solid 2, while others leaned into more cartoonish visuals, like The Wind Waker. There wasn't this obsession with hyper-realism or gritty tones that we see today. Devs were not afraid to take risks visually, which made even smaller games stand out and feel fresh. You did not need a 4K display to feel blown away. And lastly, let's not forget about the presentation. When you bought a game, it wasn't just a disc, it was an experience. You had detailed manuals, cool box art, and even sometimes posters. Opening a new game felt like opening a gift. It was part of the experience. It's a small thing, but it really added to the magic. Today, buying a game often means clicking a button and watching a download bar. I know people play digital games now, including me, but I just miss the feeling of going into a game store and buying a new game. Then you'd bring that game home, tear off the plastic, crack open the box, and boom. The sound of the PlayStation 2 boot up, or the Xbox, or the GameCube or Dreamcast, it all added to the magic. You weren't just starting a game, you were stepping into something magical. There was just something special about it, and I honestly miss it. And this brings me to my next point. Nostalgia. Listen, let's be honest. A big part of why the 6th generation hits so hard to me is because of the memories tied to it. It's not all about the specs, the games, or even the manuals. It's about what it all meant at the time. For a lot of us, these consoles were part of our childhood or teenage years. It takes me back to late night with my brothers, cheat codes written on paper, renting games, or 7-Up allowance just to buy that one title that you could not stop thinking about. You remember exactly what it felt when you booted up a game for the first time. The music, the graphics, even the loading screens. Those moments are burned into our memories. They're more than just games. They're snapshots of a time when life was simpler and games felt magical. That's the thing about nostalgia. It's not just remembering the past, it's feeling it. And every time I pick up a controller from that era or hear that PS2 or GameCube startup sound, it hits me. It takes me back to a time where the only thing that mattered was beating that game. And look, listen, I know that nostalgia should not be a factor on why something is better than the other thing. But with certain things like music and video games and media in general, the memories tied to it are so important to us that it's hard not to bring it up. And so that's why I think, it should not be a factor, but it is at the end of the day. So yeah, that was pretty much it. That's why I think, in my opinion, the 6th generation of gaming was the best. And look, I know games have to evolve, and I'm not saying that I'm not playing the newer games. I'm always gonna play video games forever, but I don't know, I just miss, the 6th generation. Anyway, that's gonna wrap up this video for today. If you stuck around this long, thank you, seriously. And get in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Was it your favorite generation? What was your favorite generation of gaming? Any memories tied to it? Leave it down below. I'm curious to know. And if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss the next one. Appreciate you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.